I'm going to be talking about the new energy trade today, which follows from Ross Garnaut's book, Superpower. Ross articulated the case for Australia becoming a major exporter of green commodities. Before I joined his institute, the Superpower Institute, he asked me to independently test this vision. So today I'm going to discuss the resulting report, New Energy Trade, which I launched at Parliament House a bit over a year ago. So the green export thesis, as I see it, is based on a few simple propositions. The first is that the world will mainly trade embedded energy. That is, clean energy that's been embodied in energy-intensive goods, the energy that was used to make them. Intensive commodities such as green iron, aluminium, silicon and polysilicon, ammonia and urea, methanol and other green fuels. Second, most major economies will lack enough cheap clean energy to meet their own domestic needs. And the resulting cost differences between countries will drive this trade in embedded energy. And third, countries that have a large comparative advantage in clean energy production, including Australia, can take a large share of the trade. This will contribute significantly to global climate mitigation and improve the standard of living in importer and exporter countries alike. So why will this be a trade in embedded energy? So extensive trade depends on the low costs of transporting goods from one place to another. Transporting fossil fuels happens to be cheap. In the net zero age, this will change. Transporting clean energy is prohibitively expensive. To ship renewable energy generated in Australia, for example to Japan or Korea, requires first converting it into intermediaries, such as liquid hydrogen, or ammonia or methanol, and then transporting those intermediaries to the other country and subsequently combusting them. From 66 to 80% of the energy is lost along the way. That means that energy transported from Australia will at minimum cost 3 to 5 times as much in these countries as it does here. On the other hand, transporting embedded energy in the form of iron, aluminium and other green commodities, that will remain cheap. So this is how the post-fossil energy trade will proceed. So with that, let's turn to the question of these cost differences between countries. And so which country is going to have this comparative advantage in the trade? Now consider a typical study, this one from the CSIRO, estimating the costs of renewable energy production in the future across major global regions. You can see Australia's there in the green. Now on the y-axis, we've got the price of renewable energy, the CSIRO estimated for 2050. And you can see that Australia's competitiveness, it's pretty good, but it's not world leading. If China and India are the cheapest sources, then they'll likely be the major exporters with a diminished role for Australia. But there are some major weaknesses in the CSIRO analysis. Let's turn to the next component of this underlying economic framework. It's the logic of open trade. So this is an illustrative supply curve in a simple 3-country world. Country A in the blue, country B, and then yellow is country C. Now, like all supply curves, the price is on the y-axis and the volume supplied is on the x-axis. So the cheapest resource is here on the left, the most expensive is over on the right, and the wider the column, the more that can be traded at that given price. So say country C is exploring the possibility of being a major energy exporter. That's the yellow one. Does it have a comparative advantage in the energy trade? Well, the answer depends on the level of demand. So say first that imagine that countries A and B, this dotted line here, have very low level of demand. So not much of the world's energy is needed to satisfy their demand. Well then, country A is going to have the cheapest energy, cheapest marginal price. But if demand in countries A and B is very high, then this changes. Country C now has the comparative advantage. If countries A and B want to supply, the demand goes up to here. If they want to supply that much energy, but are only using their bars, they've got to go way off the graph into very high prices. The cheapest marginal source of energy is going to be country C. How big is future demand going to be? Those are really the key questions of this analysis. How you get away from the CSIRO graph into a different sort of story. The flaw in the CSIRO approach is that it just looks at the cheapest resources available in these countries today. So this is like looking at the cheapest resource, leftmost resource in every single country. It doesn't tell us anything about the future. So let's turn to energy demand first. Only about 29% of fossil fuels today are consumed to produce electricity. This we can replace with renewables, with nuclear power, the power plants with CCS, or any other zero carbon option. The other 71% of fossil fuels is consumed directly in cars, ships, and planes, and in buildings for heating, and in industry for energy, and as a source of elemental carbon. Now, all major analysts expect that this 71% of fossil fuels is going to be mostly decarbonised through electrification. That is, we replace conventional vehicles with electric vehicles, electric heating replaces fossil fuel heating, and so on. The most important point is that the consequence of electrifying all this activity at large scale is that electricity demand is going to grow immensely. We need to start by looking at the ways in which fossil fuels are used today. So I've got a big, complex electrification model, but let's get on to a concrete summary. Here's how this projection plays out for China. So we start with total energy of all kinds used in China in 2021. Projected Chinese GDP growth drives a large increase in total energy demand. Expected reductions in energy intensity significantly, but far from completely, offset that increase in demand. Then we have the effects of electrification, which further cuts total energy demand. And finally, China can offshore energy-intensive industries to further cut its energy requirements. If we look at the Chinese energy demand in 2021, and you look after electrification, this is through to 2060, you might notice that the levels actually dropped, which looks kind of promising, like it might be somewhat of an easy task for China to satisfy its future electricity needs with zero carbon options. So this is actually a 300% increase in electricity demand from 2021 to 2060 in China. At this point, at 2060, after full electrification, China's using more electricity than the entire world uses today. Future electricity demand is going to be enormous. And this is where you start to hit the problem of satisfying all of that with cheap renewables. How much wind, how much solar does China really have to satisfy that? Both in electricity demand in China, it's about 300% by the time it electrifies, about 1,200% in India, much more because it's got so much development to do, and also population growth. Japan, Korea, and Germany is around 200%. Now the question is, how do you satisfy this demand? And that's the question of relative technology costs. The question really is one of comparing all their domestic options for producing electricity cleanly versus trading with Australia, doing this embedded energy trade. So do they have cheaper options? And the answer is they do not. We'll go through them. We'll start with nuclear power. But nuclear will, as Simon said, be very important for countries that have a paucity of wind and solar resources. But it's very expensive. So recently built nuclear power plants in the West cost around $300 per megawatt hour up to $440 per megawatt hour. This is 3 to 5 times the expected cost of renewables with firming. Now, will prices come down? Differences are enormous. This is a 99.6% reduction, 99.6% reduction in solar prices. Nuclear, unfortunately, the prices have just gone up and up and up and up. And the lowest point was at the start. And if you look at the highest one over there, it's almost a 20-fold increase. These are Western plants here, but in recent years in Japan, real costs have quadrupled, and in India they've tripled. China built only 1.4 gigawatts of nuclear in 2023 and 290 gigawatts of solar and wind. So China appears to be making a vote with its wallet, and at the moment its build rate of nuclear will be enough for nuclear to contribute about 4% of its energy needs in 2060. That's the cheapest nuclear in the world. The long story short of this is that it's solar and wind. I don't think that will surprise many of you. These are the most important determinants of comparative advantage in clean energy. That is, who's got clean energy in the future? The country that has not lots of biomass, not nuclear, not CCS, but it will be the countries that have abundant solar and wind. Here's my results. The results of my analysis based on countries' supply curves and their levels of electricity demand in the future. But what this is it's the summary of the marginal quality of wind and solar resources available at the relevant level of electricity demand in each country by the middle part of the century. Or put simply, This is what's left after the better bits of their resources have been used up. This is the solar capacity factor here, and these are wind capacity factors. And we also have seasonality, which is very important. So you can see at any future multi-terawatt rollout of renewable energy, we basically have a flat supply curve. You've just got unlimited land with 26% solar, especially up north, and we have more land than we can possibly use of very good wind resources. But take India as a contrast. The CSIRO is a good example because they say that it will be the cheapest. But consider its wind resources. They're very poor outside of a few small pockets. The CSIRO's figures indicate that, yes, there are these pockets where there's cheap wind. Once India reaches around 3 terawatts of capacity, which is well below its final needs, the resources become shockingly poor. These are basically unusably low capacity factor of wind. They're the 14%. Even worse, India's resources are extremely seasonal due to the monsoonal cycle. The wind practically stops blowing for part of the year. You need wind and sun with minimal seasonality to get this cheap renewable power at high penetrations of wind and solar. Among the 5 countries examined, China actually has the richest endowment, but its problem is that it has this enormous demand. If it keeps its energy-intensive industries onshore, it's going to exhaust its competitive solar and wind resources. The CSIRO is missing this using up of these early resources. And this is what will happen in the future, at least in terms of relative prices. In fact, all these prices will come down, but the ordering will shift so that countries that whose demand outstrips their availability of wind and solar, they'll move up the list. And Australia is already low on the list and has, again, this unlimited supply curve. Only in this light, with this sort of analysis, which hadn't been done before, can you actually understand Australia's comparative advantage. So that's the good news. A quick picture on Southeast Asia. Wind resources are on the left here. Solar resources are on the right. Onshore, you can see that there's this light blue colour, and that essentially means no wind. Because it's very cloudy with the monsoonal cycle, the solar endowment is somewhat European. So there's hundreds of millions of people here in a situation that's worse than that of India. India at least has some of this yellow, and has decent sun. So Southeast Asia is in a difficult situation and will need Australia. Or if they don't use us, then they will certainly be making these commodities through fossil fuels. So let's turn briefly to the benefits of the trade for Australia. We've got energy savings for importers. If they no longer electrify these industries, iron making and all this, and keep it onshore, but they send that offshore to Australia, then they cut their electricity demand by 22 to 33%. This is a very good thing for solar and wind poor countries such as Japan, Korea, also China, India, that have enormous problems in supplying this energy, basically reduce prices for households or other industries if they can do this offshoring. The Australian climate mitigation potential at the upper bound of this, so supposing that Australia was to process all its iron ore and aluminium ore, bauxite, into metal before sending it overseas and take a decent share of the various other green fuel and other metal industries, then Australia could contribute around 9% cut of global emissions, which is about 6 times Australia's actual emissions contribution by itself. It's Australia's potential to become a hub for these green commodities, really, that is our greatest potential contribution to climate change or mitigation. And then the upper bound in terms of export revenue, if we were to realise the vision to its maximum level, would be around $1 trillion per annum at current market prices for these various commodities. About 1/8 of that would be plenty. That would replace revenue from all our current fossil fuel industries. There's a bunch of things we need to do to grasp the opportunity. Government has a very clear role in this. Governments need to support innovation because early plants, early innovators always take on additional risk and basically pay the costs of learning for everybody else. Government always has a role in providing public common user infrastructure. But we need market forces to guide the most cost-effective investments. We need to maintain open trade. Australia really depends on low-cost inputs from countries such as China, and we need to be understood as a reliable source of these critical materials. We have to be trustworthy. We need to manage debt and inflation, and restoring interest rates. These are very, very capital-intensive projects. They only go ahead if the cost of capital is low. Green project approvals is an absolutely huge one. That's the first thing that basically all the firms that are interested in doing these projects want to talk to you about. And we need to ensure policy certainty by building bipartisan support, because these are long-term projects. That's perhaps the most difficult one of all. Thanks a lot.